The boy was crying again. Jimmy Stewart saw the hand grab Tommy's shoulders, hard, too hard, and what happened next would end a career in Hollywood forever. Tommy Hensley wiped his nose on his sleeve. Farm boy from Iowa with gap teeth and freckles, the kind of kid casting directors loved. Clean-cut American boy next door. But that smile was gone now, replaced by something Jimmy Stewart recognized from his own childhood in Steubenville, Ohio. Fear. The same fear he'd felt when his own father's voice would boom through their house after a long day at the hardware store. When disappointment hung in the air like smoke from his dad's pipe, Jimmy had been watching all week, taking mental notes, making quiet phone calls, because what he'd learned about Frank Morrison made his blood run cold. It reminded him of his old neighborhood back in Pennsylvania, the way some men treated children like they were adults who just happened to be small. The way they forgot that a child's spirit could be broken as easily as a twig under a boot. His own father, Alexander Stewart, had never been cruel, but Jimmy remembered the fear in other kids' eyes when certain adults were around, the way they'd shrink back, the way they'd stop laughing. The assistant director was at it again. Every missed line brought harsh words. Every stumble brought lectures about professionalism. Every natural 8-year-old fidget brought something worse when nobody was looking. Morrison had a reputation. Whispers followed him from set to set, stories about children who worked with him and left different, quieter, more withdrawn. Some never acted again. The studio knew. Of course they knew. But Morrison delivered pictures on time and under budget. In 1954 Hollywood, that was all that mattered. But Jimmy was about to make sure it mattered to someone else. During lunch break, Jimmy made a phone call from his dressing room, not to his agent or publicist, to a man named William Douglas who worked for the Screen Actors Guild in their newly formed Committee for Juvenile Performer Protection. Small department, understaffed and overworked, but they had one thing Morrison didn't expect: Jimmy's full attention and cooperation. "Bill, it's Jimmy. I need you to come down to MGM this afternoon. Bring a camera if you can, and maybe someone from the Guild's legal department." "What's going on, Jim?" "I've got a situation here that needs documenting. A man named Frank Morrison. He's forgotten that 8-year-old boys aren't seasoned professionals." What happened next would become legendary in Hollywood circles, though it would never make the gossip columns. William Douglas arrived at MGM Studios with a small team just as afternoon shooting began. Jimmy positioned them strategically around the soundstage, hidden behind equipment and in shadows where they could observe without being seen. Morrison, unaware he was being watched, slipped back into his pattern almost immediately. When Tommy flubbed a line during the first take, Morrison's voice cut across the stage like a knife. "Jesus Christ, kid, we've been over this a dozen times. Are you stupid or just lazy?" The boy's face crumpled. He tried to hold back tears. That's when Morrison made his fatal mistake. He grabbed Tommy by the shoulders and shook him, hard enough to make the boy's teeth rattle. "Stop that sniveling. You want to be an actor? Then act like one." The cameras captured everything: the verbal abuse, the physical contact, the obvious terror in a child's eyes. But more importantly, they captured Jimmy's response. And what Jimmy did next shocked everyone on that set. Jimmy rose from his chair with controlled grace. He didn't rush, didn't shout, just walked over to where Morrison stood over the trembling boy and placed himself between them. The crew members later said they'd never seen anything like it. Jimmy Stewart, the biggest star on the lot, moving with the calm determination of a man who'd flown bombers over Germany and lived to tell about it. This wasn't acting. This was the real man behind the movie star facade. War had taught him to recognize real threats, real cruelty, and right now he was looking at both. "Frank," Jimmy said, voice calm but carrying steel that made everyone stop what they were doing, "I think you need to take a break. I'm directing this scene, Stewart. The kid needs to." "The kid," Jimmy interrupted, tone dropping to a level that made the sound technician reach for his controls, "is 8 years old, and he's doing his best. Which is more than I can say for some adults in this room." Behind the cameras, crew members exchanged glances. Some had worked with Jimmy for years, but they'd never heard this edge in his voice. It was the voice of a man who'd seen real cruelty in the world and decided he wouldn't tolerate it anymore. The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes would echo through Hollywood for years, not because of any dramatic showdown, but because of what Jimmy did next. He turned to the boy, knelt to his level, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tommy, I want you to know something. You're a good actor. You're a brave kid. and nobody, and I mean nobody, has the right to treat you the way you've been treated this week." Then Jimmy stood up, looked directly at Frank Morrison, said the words that would end Morrison's career in Hollywood. "Frank, you're done here. Pack your things." Morrison's face went red. "You can't fire me. I'm the assistant director." "Maybe so," Jimmy replied, "but I'm the star of this picture, and I have something called a morals clause in my contract. Says I don't have to work with people who abuse children, so you can leave on your own, or I can call studio security. Your choice." The silence on the soundstage was deafening. Everyone knew they were witnessing something unprecedented, a major star using his power not for personal gain, but to protect a child he barely knew. Morrison left without another word. He was blacklisted within a week. Though no one ever said Jimmy had anything to do with it, they didn't have to. In Hollywood, some messages are sent without words, but the real magic happened in the weeks that followed. Tommy Hensley finished the picture under guidance of a new assistant director, Ruth Harrison, a gentle woman who'd worked with child actors for 20 years. The boy blossomed under her care, delivered a performance that would earn him an MGM contract and launch a career lasting well into his teens. Jimmy never took credit for any of it. When reporters asked about the personnel change mid-production, he simply said, "Sometimes you need fresh eyes on a project." But Tommy Hensley knew, and so did everyone else who was there that day. However, what most people never knew was the phone call Jimmy received that night. Tommy's mother called him at home around 10 o'clock. Her voice was shaking when she spoke. "Mr. Stewart, I don't know what you did today, but Tommy called me tonight and he was different. Happy. For the first time since he went to Hollywood, he sounded like my little boy again." She paused. Jimmy could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. "I don't know what was happening to him out there, but I was getting scared. He was getting so quiet, so sad. I was thinking about bringing him home. You know, Mr. Stewart, we're just farm people from Iowa. We don't know much about this Hollywood business. But I know when my boy is hurting." Her voice broke completely then. "When he called tonight, he told me about you, about how you stood up for him, about how you made the bad man go away. He said you made him feel safe again." Jimmy found himself gripping the phone tighter. "Ma'am, Tommy's a good boy. He just needed someone to remind him that being 8 years old isn't something to apologize for." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for watching out for him. You know, his daddy died 2 years ago. Tractor accident. Tommy's been trying so hard to be the man of the house. Maybe that's why this acting thing. Maybe he thought he had to be perfect all the time." "Mrs. Hensley," Jimmy said gently, "Tommy doesn't need to be perfect. He just needs to be Tommy. That's enough. That's more than enough." Jimmy hung up the phone and sat in his living room, staring out at the lights of Los Angeles. He thought about his own children, about how he'd want someone to protect them if they were ever in Tommy's situation. The next morning, Jimmy made another phone call, this one to Louis B. Mayer himself, head of MGM Studios. "Louis, it's Jim. I want to talk to you about something important. It's about how we treat the children who work for us." What came out of that conversation was unprecedented in Hollywood history. MGM became the first major studio to implement comprehensive protections for child actors, mandatory education hours, psychological evaluations for anyone working directly with minors, zero-tolerance policy for any form of abuse. Other studios followed suit within the year. The changes weren't perfect. There were still problems in Hollywood for decades to come. But it was a start, a foundation built on one man's refusal to look the other way when a child needed help. But here's the part of the story that will really amaze you. 25 years later, in 1979, Jimmy was at a charity dinner in Los Angeles when a middle-aged man approached his table. Well-dressed, confident, kind eyes, and a warm smile. "Mr. Stewart, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Tommy Hensley." Jimmy looked up. Slowly a smile spread across his face. "Tommy, good Lord, look at you. What brings you to Los Angeles?" "I'm here visiting my daughter. She's a freshman at UCLA. She wants to be a teacher, just like her old man." Tommy sat down at the table. For a moment, both men were quiet. "Mr. Stewart, I need to tell you something. What you did for me in 1954, it didn't just save my career. It saved my life." Jimmy started to wave off the compliment. Tommy held up his hand. "No, please. Let me finish. I went on to have a good run as a child actor, but that's not what I'm talking about. What you taught me that day about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves, that became the foundation of everything I've done since." Tommy leaned forward, his voice earnest. "I've been a teacher for 15 years now, And in that time, I've had to step in for kids who were being bullied, kids who were being hurt at home, kids who just needed someone to believe in them. Every time I did it, I thought about you, about how you didn't hesitate to do the right thing, even when it might have cost you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was a picture of Tommy's 6th grade class from his first year of teaching. "These kids don't know your name, Mr. Stewart, but your influence is in that classroom every day, because you taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is protect someone who needs protecting." Jimmy took the photograph and studied the young faces looking back at him. 26 children, all grinning at the camera, obviously adoring their teacher. "I've got news for you, Tommy," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't need me to teach you how to be a good man. That was already in you. I just made sure nobody tried to beat it out of you." The two men talked for another hour that night, sharing stories about teaching, about children, about the responsibility that comes with having influence over young lives. When they finally said goodbye, Jimmy felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in his movies or his fame, but in the chain reaction of kindness that had started with one moment of moral courage on a Hollywood soundstage 25 years earlier. The story could have ended there, but it didn't, because Tommy Hensley wasn't the only child actor whose life Jimmy changed that day in 1954. Word of what happened spread quietly through the community of child performers in Hollywood. Not as gossip, but as hope. Kids started asking for Jimmy when they were casting new pictures. Not because he was famous, but because they felt safe around him. Over the next decade, Jimmy worked with dozens of child actors, and every one of them remembered not his acting advice or his star power, but his kindness, his habit of checking in with them between takes, his way of making sure they had time to just be kids. There was Susan Miller, a 10-year-old who was terrified of making mistakes. Jimmy spent hours with her between takes, telling her stories about his own blunders, making her laugh until she forgot to be afraid. There was Bobby Richardson, a 12-year-old whose stage mother pushed him relentlessly. Jimmy quietly arranged for the boy to have extra tutoring time, away from the constant pressure. There was little Mary Catherine Walsh, who missed her family in Chicago. Jimmy made sure she got a long-distance phone call home every few days, even paying for it himself. Some of those children grew up to become actors themselves. Others became teachers, doctors, parents, ordinary people leading ordinary lives. But all of them carried with them the memory of a tall, gentle man who had shown them that adults could be trusted to do the right thing. Years later, when Tommy had grown up and left acting to become a teacher in his hometown in Iowa, he would tell his students about the day a movie star taught him the most important lesson of his life. It wasn't about acting, he would say. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it's not easy, even when it might cost you something. Jimmy never spoke publicly about what happened on stage 7 in 19. It wasn't his style to make a big show of doing the right thing. In his mind, it was simply what any decent person would do. But in Hollywood, a town built on illusion and make-believe, real decency was rarer than anyone wanted to admit, and that made Jimmy's quiet act of courage all the more remarkable. In 1984, 30 years after that day on stage 7, the Screen Actors Guild established the Jimmy Stewart Award for Outstanding Service to Young Performers. It wasn't Jimmy's idea. In fact, he tried to talk them out of it, but the Guild insisted, and the award continues to this day. The first recipient wasn't Jimmy himself, though everyone expected it to be. Instead, the award went to Tommy Hensley, who by then had become a principal and had influenced the lives of thousands of children over his career in education. In his acceptance speech, Tommy said something that brought Jimmy Stewart to tears. "This award isn't really for me. It's for every child who needed someone to stand up for them and found that someone in Jimmy Stewart. It's for every teacher, every parent, every adult who chooses to be a protector instead of just a bystander. And it's a reminder that the smallest act of courage can change not just one life, but generations of lives." But even that wasn't the end of the story, because the ripple effects of what happened on stage 7 in 1954 continued to spread for decades. Children who worked with Jimmy grew up and became parents themselves. They raised their own kids with the same protective instincts they'd learned from him. They stood up to bullies. They reported abuse. They created safe spaces for children wherever they went. Tommy Hensley's students went on to become teachers, social workers, child psychologists. They carried Jimmy's lesson forward into their own careers. The idea that protecting children isn't just a job, it's a moral imperative. By the 1980s, Hollywood had changed dramatically from the Wild West atmosphere of the 1950s. Child labor laws were stronger, union protections were better, studio oversight was more comprehensive. Not all of that was because of Jimmy, but his fingerprints were on much of it. He'd shown that stars could use their power for something more than just career advancement. The boy stopped crying that day in 1954, But the ripples of that moment are still spreading, 70 years later, in classrooms across America, in the policies that protect child performers, in the countless quiet moments when adults choose to do the right thing because they remember a story about a movie star who refused to look away when a child needed help. Jimmy died in 1997, but his legacy isn't really about the movies he made or the awards he won. It's about a choice he made on a soundstage in Hollywood, a choice to be the kind of person who protects children instead of systems, who values human dignity over convenience. And it's about all the people who were inspired by that choice to make similar ones in their own lives. The beautiful thing about courage is that it's contagious. When one person stands up, it gives others permission to stand up too. When Jimmy placed himself between Frank Morrison and Tommy Hensley that day, he wasn't just protecting one child. He was modeling behavior for everyone watching. He was saying without words that this is how decent people act when children are in danger. You ever wonder what you would have done in Jimmy's place? When you saw that little boy crying in the corner, would you have had the courage to step in? The beautiful thing about this story is that you don't have to wonder, because somewhere in your life, there's probably a child who needs exactly the kind of protection Jimmy gave to Tommy. Maybe it's a kid being bullied at school. Maybe it's a young person struggling with confidence. Maybe it's just someone who needs an adult to believe in them. The opportunity to be someone's Jimmy Stewart is probably closer than you think. What would you do? How would you step in? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most important conversations start with the simplest questions. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age. Thanks for watching.